I have for you today a review video to help you prepare for your test that you will be taking. For whatever reason, maybe you're not in class or you want extra help or whatever else, this is for you. So I want to give you a couple of helpful hints here first on how to prepare for your test. So the first thing I would suggest you do is work through the different review problems on the review. Any questions you have or any of the things you aren't sure how to do, make a note of those so you can ask. You can look in your notes, you can write them in your notes, all of those things. Second, ask for help. Okay, ask your teacher, ask another student. Anything that you're not sure about, ask someone else to explain it to you, to give you an example, to help you understand it better. Make sure that your notes are prepared. Remember, you get to use your notes, so you want to make sure that they are ready to go. Once your questions are answered, whatever they might be, include those answers in your notes. Write them down. Any helpful hints that you have or that someone else gave you, write those down as well. Anything that you might forget. Lastly, take time to compare with another student. Um, Compare your notes to theirs, see if they have the same things you do. Maybe they have something else that you want to add to your notes. Maybe you have something that they want to add to their notes. Always good to collaborate and get ideas from other people. Okay, so those are kind of my how-to tips for getting ready for your test. Let's actually work through some of the problems and talk about those. These are the problems from the review, okay? So first of all, we've got the square root of negative 100. Remember that anytime you have a negative, you want to split that up. And the square root of negative 1 becomes an I. Square root of 100 is 10. So we have 10I. Same with the square root of 75. We're going to make that I and then positive 75. Now 75 doesn't have a square root, but you should make a factor tree and look for pairs. So here I have a pair of 5s. That's going to come out front with the I. And then I'm going to be left with a 3 inside. Square root of 44, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to start with an I, and then I'm going to make a little factor tree over here on the side for 44, which is 4 times 11, and I have a pair of 2s. Those are going to come out with the I, and I'm going to be left with an 11 in the square root. 80, again, negative 80 is the same thing, so I'm going to have an I out front. I'm going to make a factor tree for 80. 8 times 10. 10 is 5 times 2. 8 is 4 times 2. And 4 is 2 times 2. This time I have a pair here and a pair here. So I'm going to multiply that. 2 times 2 is 4 out front. And then my little 5 is left over inside. Last I've got negative 36. The square root of 36 is 6. And that negative gives me an I, so I have 6. Okay? Hopefully you're pretty good on simplifying these. Again, if you have questions, please ask for help. Adding and subtracting, remember we're combining like terms, which has to be the same variable to the same power. I like to use my shapes. So I've got the x squareds. I'm going to take my x's, and then I'm going to take my constants, and I'm going to put them together. 3x squared plus negative 5x squared is negative 2x squared. Negative 7x plus 4x is negative 3x. And 1 plus negative 8 is negative 7. Done. I'm going to do the same thing on the next one. So I've got a 9x cubed, a negative 6x cubed, 2x squared, and negative 2x squared, negative 4x and x. And then let's do a triangle. Okay. Now remember, this time I am subtracting. That's important here. So I'm going to take 9x cubed minus negative 6x cubed is 15x cubed. And I'm going to take 2x squared minus negative 2x squared is 4x squared. Then I'm going to take negative 4x minus x is negative 5x. And negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. Again, be careful about the signs, especially when you are subtracting. Really pay attention to that. We also want to be able to multiply. This is where I really recommend using box. So 6x plus 2 times 3x minus 5. Go through and multiply all the pieces together. I hope you're getting pretty good at this by now. And then remember that you combine diagonally. So we've got 18x squared minus 24x minus 10. When I combine that 6x plus negative 30x, that's where the negative 24x came from. Now, the next one, when I'm taking x plus 5, remember, I'm not squaring each piece, I'm squaring that quantity. So I'm taking x plus 5 times x plus 5. That is really important that you pay attention to that, okay? Because you will not get it right if you just try to square the pieces. And I end up with x squared plus 10x plus 25. One last one here, we want to do 4x minus 3 times 4x plus 3. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to multiply the pieces again. This time, when I add 12x and negative 12x, they're going to cancel, and I'm left with 16x squared minus 9. And that is my final answer. So multiplying, again, you can FOIL or you can use the box. I use the box just because I think it makes more sense, and it always works, but the choice is yours. Simplifying with I now. It's the same thing that we just did with x, except you're doing it with an I. So you're combining like terms, which gives you 3 plus 16i. It is important that you write it in the order, okay? 16i plus 3 is not correct. Do not write it like that. It has to be in the form a plus bi. Please don't make us take points off because you didn't write it in the correct order, okay? Please write it in the correct order. That's important. 9 minus 12 is negative 3. 8i minus negative 16i is 24i. And we are done with that. We can also multiply these. Again, I suggest the box because then you remember to simplify in that last corner. And that is important. You don't want to forget to do that, okay? So multiply all the pieces and you will get an I squared at the end. Remember that 35 times I squared is negative 1. So this becomes negative 35. Then you combine your like terms. So negative 8 plus negative 35 is negative 43. 28 plus negative 10i is 18i. We can do the same thing for this one down here. We've got 8 plus I, 2 plus 3i, and we go through and we multiply all of the pieces. Again, 3 times negative 1 gives me that negative 3 down here, which I combine with the 16 to get 13. And then I take 2i plus 24i is 26i. So again, I'm just multiplying the same way I did polynomials. Just don't forget that I squared, okay? We can do the same thing here. 4 plus I squared means we're taking 4 plus I times 4 plus I. And we're going to multiply through, do all the pieces. Remember that I squared is negative 1. And 16 plus negative 1 is 15. 4i plus 4i is 8i. Now this last one, we don't really have to FOIL use the box or anything. It's just negative 5i squared is negative 5i times negative 5i. Okay, which is positive 25i squared, which is negative 25. All right, so when you're multiplying, be careful with that I squared. Make sure that you change it when it comes along, okay? Now, we're going to have you solve using the several different methods, and we'll tell you which method to use for most of them, just so that you know what's appropriate, okay? This first one is the square root method, which means I'm going to be square rooting. So I'm going to get the x squared by itself, which in this case it is, and I'm just going to solve. Don't forget your plus or minus. That's super important. The square root of negative 49 is 7i, so I have plus or minus 7i. Those are my two solutions. Now on this one, I'm going to have to do a little work to solve. So I'm going to start by subtracting 144, and then I'm going to divide by 2, which is negative 72. Then I'm going to square root both sides, and I get I'm going to have an I, and 72 doesn't have a square root, but I do need to make a factor tree for that, because I know it has some pairs. So I have a pair of 2's and a pair of 3's, which I'm going to multiply. Let me rewrite this down here. 6. Don't forget my I because it's negative. And then my leftover that's in the radical is a 2. These are my 2 solutions. Don't forget to make a factor tree, okay? That's important. I'm going to start over here by adding 7 to 193, which is 200. I'm going to square root. And I'm going to make a factor tree for 200 real quick. 2 times 100. 100 is 10 times 10. I'm going to stop right there because I have a pair. So it's 10 square root of 2. This is my final answer. Okay? Please don't forget that part of simplifying the radical. Make your factor tree, look for pairs. A lot of the radicals you're dealing with will be simplifiable. All right? Our second method is to solve by factoring. This is where you're breaking it apart into the 2 sets of parentheses and you're solving. So here on this first one, I want to know what multiplies to be 10 and adds to be 7. 5 and 2. Then remember that when I'm solving, I'm taking the opposite. So my answers are -5 and -2. That one wasn't too bad. Remember when a is 1, it's a little bit easier because I just have to break that x squared up into x and x, and then find the factors of 24 that add to be -11, -8, and -3. Then don't forget the last piece of solving, take the opposite of the parentheses, x equals 8 and 3. Now on this third one here, I have an a, which is not 1, it's 6. I want to first see if I can take anything out. Does 6 go into all 3 of these? No, it does not, which means that I'm going to have to break this apart, and I'm going to have to take the factors of 6, so 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and the factors of 6, 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and I'm going to have to try to somehow get them to equal 13. Let's try 2x and 3x, and then 3 and 2. This isn't really fair because I know where I'm going here, but 3 times 3 is 9, 2 times 2 is 4, and 9 plus 4 is 13. I need it to be negative, so I'm going to make them both negative. Now I'm going to solve, and I'm going to take 2x minus 3 equals 0, and I'm going to solve that, which gives me 3 over 2. Then I'm going to take 3x minus 2 equals 0, and I'm going to solve that, which is going to give me 2 over 3. Those are my 2 solutions, okay? Please don't forget the solving part. Once you get it factored, you're not done. You have to solve those to figure out what values make each parenthesis equal to 0. Don't forget that piece of it, okay? Our third method that we talked about was completing the square. That is the one with the blanks. So we're going to start by moving the constant and writing in some blanks, which we're then going to take half of the middle number and square it. So half of 6 is 3 squared is 9. That's what goes in my blanks. Now I'm going to factor. Remember that this is x plus 3 because 3 is half of 6 and it's the square root of 9. And then on this right side, I'm going to combine 59 plus 9 is 68. Now I'm going to square root both sides. On the left, I just have x plus 3. And on the right, I have plus or minus. 68 is positive, so I don't need an I. But I should probably make a factor tree just to see. 2 times 34. 34 is 2 times 17. So I have a pair of 2's. So 2 square root of 17. Then my last step is to get this 3 to the other side. I'm going to change its sign and it becomes -3 plus or minus 2 square root of 17. That is my final answer. Now I'm going to do the same thing over here. The constant is already moved for me, so I just need to add in my blanks. Okay? I'm going to do that. I'm going to take half of 2, which is 1. 1 squared is 1. Then I'm going to factor x plus 1 squared. -20 plus 1 is -19. I'm going to square root both sides. So I get x plus 1 on the left. On the right, I get plus or minus I square root of 19. Now, I did not bother to make a factor tree for 19. I know that there's nothing that goes into it. What I am going to do is subtract the 1 to the other side. So it becomes 1, negative 1, sorry, plus or minus I square root of 19. And there we go. Our last method is the quadratic formula. You should have written down somewhere what the quadratic formula is. That is important so that you know the formula. You don't want to try to do this. Maybe you have it memorized, which is awesome. But it's nice to have it written down so you don't have to worry about it, okay? Then you're just going to plug in your pieces. Remember that it has to be equal to 0 first. I'm going to start by adding 5. And then I'm going to plug in my A, B, and C into the quadratic formula. I'm going to take the opposite of 6, which is negative 6, minus the square root of 6 squared, minus 4, times A, which is 8, times C, which is 5, all over 2 times A, which is 8. And then I'm going to start simplifying. Okay, so I'm going to take within the radical, 6 squared is 36. 4 times 8 times 5 is 160. 2 times 8 is 16. Then I'm going to simplify even more in the radical by taking 36 minus 160, which is negative 124. Then I want to simplify my radical. Now I know I'm going to need an I because it's negative, but do I need a number? Let's make a factor tree for 124. Let's see, that would be 2 times 62. This would be 2 times 31. So I have a pair of 2's, comes outside. Square root of 31 stays inside. And now I can divide each of these by 2, which gives me a final answer of negative 3 plus or minus I square root of 31 all over 8. Again, that's a lot of work. Make sure you have the quadratic formula written down somewhere. Make sure that you know what you're doing with this, okay? I'm going to do the same thing on this second problem here. I've got A, B, and C, and I'm going to plug them in. This time it's positive 6 because negative 6 is positive 6. But I'm still going to keep the negative 6 squared. Minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. Then I'm going to go through and start simplifying. So 6 squared is 36. 4 times 9 times negative 11 is going to give me plus 396 all over 18. And then I'm going to simplify again. 36 plus 396 is, let's see, 42432 over 18. I am positive I need to make a factor tree for 432, so I'm going to do that real quick. I think 4 goes into that. 108. This is 2 times 2. 108 is 9 times 12. 3 times 3. 4 times 3. 2 times 2. So I have a pair of 2's, a pair of 3's, and a pair of 2's. So I'm going to take 2 times 3 times 2 is 12. And I'm left with a 3 inside the square root. Then I can divide each of these by 6. So I'm going to do that. And I get 1 plus or minus 2 square root of 3 over 3. Ooh, that's hard to see. And that is my final answer. Those were both kind of a doozy, weren't they? It can be time consuming and tedious to solve these problems, especially when you have to simplify the radical. So make sure that you're working through all of the steps. This is definitely one I would have an example or two of in my notes so that I'm ready to go with this, okay? So again, please make sure that you study, use those helpful hints that I gave you. Make sure that you are ready to do this. Make sure that your notes are in order, and we will go over any questions that you might have.